The following program is made possible by the friends and partners of GodQuest Ministries.
What exactly are your children being taught today? That's what we want to talk about on the Creation Today show. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Hovind, and I'm joined by Paul Taylor.
And we'll be talking about education, and particularly we were sent an article from the summer 2012 edition of a magazine called American Educator, talking about a policy document. We're going to be having a look at that and discussing what education really is in American schools today.
It is getting frightening exactly what's going on. We believe, by the way, that the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate in every single detail, and that's what we want to defend. If you got questions, you can send them into questions@creationtoday.org. Enjoy the show. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Creation Today show. We have got a great show for you because education is upon us. The summer's over, Paul. Kids are getting ready to go back to school, starting to learn, and they need to be careful out there, don't they?
Parents are ready for their kids to go back to school.
No doubt about that.
But yeah, we get a lot of questions about education. I get a lot of questions coming in by email about education. Our children are being taught this or that. Help, I'm being taught whatever. I was sent a detailed question which introduced us to an article that we're going to be looking at some of the philosophy behind education in the United States today, and where is it going, where is it supposed to go.
Before we do that, though, I want to remind you about a couple of things. Coming up very soon, we've got the Proof of God Conference, which is really going to be incredible. Matter of fact, in another show coming up, we really want to discuss the reason we're putting on this conference. It really is so important. But we've got an incredible lineup of speakers for you. Carl Kirby from Reason for Hope Ministry, Mark Spence from Way of the Master, Sidesing Brigham from ProofThatGodExists.org, Paul Taylor from Creation Today, Eric Hovind from Creation Today, Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis, and then that's just the mainline speakers. Then we've got about a dozen or more breakout session speakers. I'm telling you, it is going to be a conference you don't want to miss. It really is going to be
That's
incredible.
right, and don't forget there'll be a lot of exhibitors there and a lot of interesting things to look at around the periphery, if you like, of what's going on in the conference. So you really want to be there. Just
a couple of names off the top of my head. Jay Seeger from the Creation Education Center is going to be there as a breakout speaker. Lloyd Anderson, who we had the privilege of meeting with up at Mount St. Helens, is going to be there, and he's got an incredible presentation on what's going on at Mount St. Helens today with his museum. I'm also thinking of Stephen Lawwell is going to be there from Echoes of Eden. Anyway, several prominent creation ministries are going to be there presenting some great information that you don't want to miss. So check out the Proof of God Conference. Other announcements?
Oh yes, well you need to have a look at our YouTube channel. This show is not the only thing that we produce visually. If you want, there's a lot of informal material on the YouTube channel, so you need to go to youtube.com/creation today and have a look at what's going on there.
You can be one of the tens and tens of people that enjoy our shows,
literally
and our
tens and tens.
Tens and tens of people. Yes, it's quite. Actually, we've only been doing the Creation Today channel for about 2 months, and we've got over 65,000 views. So
amazing.
It's coming along, but make sure you're out there. We're putting tons of content out there for free.
Yes, and please, it took me a long time to do those 65,000 views. So please, if some of the rest of you could
help us out a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, one more thing. We have got a brand new shopping cart at the Creation Store that we want you to go and enjoy. Send some of the material there, the resources to your friends. Get some of the tracts. We got DVDs that you can get for $1 a piece. That way you can give them out as tracts. We really want to encourage you to use the resources to evangelize to the lost. That's the whole point of all of this.
When I became a Christian and I came across these strange people called creationists who believe the Bible to be true, there were not that many pieces of material that I could get hold of to help me understand this and to sort of back up my faith and build my faith and build up my belief in the Bible being true. So it's very, very moving, very, very important that there is a resource like the Creation Store where you can find loads and loads of stuff. Eric and I can keep on rabbiting on all day, but you probably still want to go deeper sometimes and find out a lot more. You need to be at the creation store. You need to get those materials because they're so important for your walk with the Lord.
Really is incredible. All right, well, we got a great show. Oh, what's that? Oh, our producers are letting me give you a pop quiz.
All right.
It's a brand new segment that everybody's sure to enjoy. It's becoming the most popular segment of the show, even though this is the first time we've done it. Paul, I've got a pop quiz for you. You've got 30 seconds to answer these questions.
Are these questions on music then?
No.
No. Okay. Wrong sort of pop.
Yes, wrong sort of pop. Okay, you got 30 seconds apiece.
Okay.
You can take up to 30 seconds on these questions. Okay. How do creationists describe conventional science? It's about a 2-hour lecture condensed into 30 seconds. On your mark, get set, go.
Well, creationists will describe conventional science as really thinking God's thoughts after him, because the whole point is that science is about discovering the universe, and it's the universe that was made by God. So we need to find out more about the mind of God. And that's not my that's not my idea. That's not my quote. The person who came up with that idea was Sir Isaac Newton, one of the world's most famous scientists ever.
Great answer. Okay, question number 2. Does dinosaur soft tissue prove the biblical account of creation? Is that the one that proves it?
Well, yeah, one of the things that people are often looking for, and sometimes misinformed creationists will often look for a sort of magic bullet that says, this proves that evolution is wrong, this proves that creation is true. And, we've had things like soft tissue and so on, and certainly it's really problematic for evolutionists, the fact that there is dinosaur soft tissue around, but that is not a proof, remember. The proof is that we start from believing the Bible to be true. We don't need to prove the Bible to be true by evidence from outside the Bible.
Wow, good answer. Okay, question number 3 here. What is the best evidence of the worldwide flood?
The best evidence of the worldwide flood, we could look perhaps at things like the fact that the world is covered with sedimentary rock that contains lots of marine creatures, even on high mountains and so on, but that's not the best evidence.
No.
We could look at the fact that certain ecosystems must have been buried at the same time so that you get certain organisms together in the same place, but that's not the best evidence either. Maybe some people think that they've discovered parts of the Ark on top of Mount Ararat.
Ooh.
But even if that was so, that's not the best evidence. The best evidence that the worldwide flood happened is that God said it happened, and it's reported in the pages of the Bible.
Wow. Okay, final question here. Good answers. Final question. So far, we're going to give him a 75%. Let's see if he goes for 100%.
What's the prize?
Are evolutionists more interested in improving science or proving evolution? Are evolutionary scientists more interested in improving science or proving evolution?
Well, that's an interesting one. I suppose that they would claim that they're interested in improving science because they say, well, there are these pesky creationists around who are abusing our children by teaching them that evolution's wrong. So maybe they would say that they're improving science. In the discussion that we're going to have, we would argue that they're not improving science because when they prevent the theory of evolution being examined scientifically by school pupils, they're actually being anti-science. They are not interested in proving evolution because they know that there is no way of doing so. So they actually avoid anything that might look like an attempt to prove evolution.
Wow, good answer. Okay, Paul, I'll give you 100%. Great job, man. Great job. All right. We've got a lot to get through, and we've only got 2 segments and a little bit more remaining. We got a lot to get to. Let's introduce kind of what we want to hit on today based on this article.
Yes, very, very quickly, really, in about the last minute of this segment, I was sent a link to an article called An Evolving Controversy, and it's in the summer 2012 issue of the magazine American Educator, a magazine specifically for science teachers in public schools. And this article is talking about the policy of science teaching generally across all 50 states. What should be the policy for science teaching in education? They argue that, whether they've got proof of this or not, I'm not sure, but they argue that science education in the United States is lagging behind that of certain other countries in the world, they reckon. And their thesis is that the problem is that there is not enough evolution being taught in public schools in science lessons, and they think that they need to improve the quality of children's science knowledge by making sure they learn all about evolution as soon as possible.
Wow, so what is it that we've already learned, and what is it that science was teaching, and that what they're doing now? How are they doing it? Let's talk about that, and we'll do that right after this.
Welcome back. You're watching the Creation Today show with me, Paul Taylor, and with Eric Hovind. And we're talking about education today, particularly science education, and particularly science education in America's public schools.
Which is interesting because there's a lot of people out there that would say, you guys are creationists. You don't even understand science.
And we certainly don't believe in teaching science,
That's
do we?
right. Oh, it's anathema. Shouldn't be done. Okay, so we do like science. You were a science teacher.
Oh, I was a science teacher for 18 years in public schools in England and in Wales. Of course, they're not called public schools there; they'd be called state schools or comprehensive schools. But that's the sort of school that I was a teacher in. I spent 18 years bettering my career at that, eventually becoming a head of science and acting vice principal. And I wrote quite a bit on the subject of education as well, I have to tell you. And I was involved in focus groups at the end of the 1980s that were looking at the introduction of England's national curriculum in science. So I think I've got a little bit to say on the subject.
Now, just to make sure people don't think you're just tooting your own horn, I'll say that. Paul taught for 18 years in the science classrooms over in England in government schools and worked his way up to be the headmaster at basically science education there, and even was involved in writing it there. Now you don't feel like...
Right, okay. I wasn't a headmaster, but sort of the next tier down.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a very, very important subject, looking at how science should actually be taught. And the thesis of the article that we've been talking about, the article was called An Evolving Controversy in the American Educator magazine. We don't really have time in this program to go all through it, but I'm going to be going through it and writing a lot more detail about it. But the thesis of the article is that science education in American schools is not good enough, that children are not being educated well enough in science, and B, they say the fault of that is because children are not being taught enough evolution.
Wow.
So, for example, and one of the things that we should pick up on really here is how researchers like this use language. And, you don't need to understand all the fine points about science to pick up on the fact that their use of language is rather equivocal. For example, they talk about the idea that they want evolution to be taught right from the very beginning. They're saying that it's important that children understand evolutionary biology as soon as they enter school. And then they go on to say, well, by the end of the second grade, for example, children are supposed to know that some kinds of plants and animals once lived on the earth and are no longer found anywhere, although others that may resemble them in some ways do. Now, that to me is not evolution.
No, it's not.
No, it is if they've got a sort of thesis in mind. They're saying, well, they need to be taught this so that we can say, well, those dinosaurs have eventually evolved into other things. But really what they're talking about is that some animals have gone extinct and some have not.
And that's not necessarily proof of evolution, but that's what they're trying to use it as, and what they're using this to say. And this really goes into the history of teaching of science.
Yes.
We were talking about this before the show. You said it used to be that they taught what science was and how to perform it, how to do science to test your hypothesis. How do you come up with a good hypothesis? How do you test that? How do you draw logical conclusions about what you've tested? Yes. Go into that and kind of describe that, and then contrast that to what they're doing today.
That's what real science teaching is about, what real scientists need to be about. And actually, to be fair, this article does mention this. It's just that they then get it wrong in the application of it. But science is all about a number of things, really 5 stages we can boil it down to. One is the development of a hypothesis. And then following the development of a hypothesis, once you've developed a hypothesis about something, you need to be able to design a test for that hypothesis, a fair test, so you'll be able to say whether it's true or it's not true. Then you need to learn about experimental technique so you can actually carry out that test and do it carefully and properly so that you know your results are reliable. Then you need to be able to collate those results to be able to make sure that you understand what they all are. And finally, you're going to draw some conclusions from those results. You need to be able to draw sensible conclusions that are not making some sort of leap in the dark and adding stuff that wasn't meant to be there in the first place. And what you'll notice in all those things that we've said, all those particular comments, we are not talking about the so-called giving over of loads of facts. Now, what this article is talking about is saying that they want lots and lots of evolutionary facts to be taught. And when I'm using the word facts, try and imagine quote marks around it, because of course we don't accept that they're facts. But they're talking about the giving out of loads and loads and loads of information. That does not make someone a scientist. It's how they actually use a process to produce information, to produce information, to actually produce these hypotheses and test them. That is what science is about. Good science education needs to be tackling that.
You know, for somebody who's a creationist and doesn't understand science, I'd say you knew that pretty well. One of the things the article talks about, and you make note of it, is it talks about coming from a consensus. What is the consensus? What are most people saying?
Yes.
But that doesn't
Yes.
prove anything. Consensus does not equal truth.
Yes, well, they're talking about the idea that we should learn about today's consensus in biology, which, of course, they mention a couple of things, such as the theory of evolution, and also the idea about principles about so-called climate change. What they both have in common is that there is a consensus position, and they're criticizing those people who don't actually fit in with that consensus. What's interesting is that when you go back in history, science innovations have always come about from those people who have gone against the consensus.
Exactly.
You see, this whole process of experimentation and testing and then refuting hypotheses is actually anti-consensual, because science, true science, is not about the consensus.
It doesn't matter what the majority say. You look at whether it's Galileo or Newton or these people that actually, they had to go in the face of serious persecution in order to go against the consensus.
Yes. You see, the article actually quite correctly talks about rigorous testing of scientific ideas. But, you know, we need to ask, where is the rigorous testing of the theory of evolution?
Wow.
When the article
Great
itself is arguing strongly that children should not be allowed to question the precepts of evolution. So that very concept is anti-scientific.
All right, so when your kids are going to school this semester and they're being taught science, that's something that I think could be brought up from a student's perspective, with respect, of course, and we've done several shows on how do you be a Christian in the secular, science classes and things like that. You can check those out on our website, creationtoday.org. But really, that is the key. Okay, why can't we, if science is all about testing, observing, testing, and then drawing conclusions and testing hypotheses, why can't we do that with evolution? They don't want that done.
To be fair, there'll be some creationist parents who get this wrong as well. They're saying, well, we don't want our kids to be taught evolution. Actually, if children are being taught proper process-led science, you have no need to fear your children being taught evolution. In fact, from a creationist point of view, we need our children to understand evolution better than the way that the evolutionists want it to be taught, so they know what it actually says and how it can be refuted.
And that really is something that you guys can learn. You can learn how evolution is taught, the truth about it, and then be able to refute it. We don't have to be afraid of evolution. There's a lot of Christians out there that are afraid of it. They don't want their kids to learn it because they're afraid. They see the statistics of what's going on. And they say, well, I don't want that to happen to my kid. Well, all you got to do, don't worry about teaching them that. Let them learn that, but also teach them the truth. I mean, when you have the truth, you want your mind to clamp down on that, We are not open-minded that 2 + 2 could equal anything other than 4. We're closed-minded, and we're closed-minded that this is the Word of God. Let's talk more about this article because it goes into some more very interesting things. We'll do that right after this. You're watching the Creation Today show with Paul Taylor and Eric Hovind. We're talking about what kids are being taught in school and how science is actually being taught. They don't teach it the way that they used to teach it. They used to teach critical thinking skills. Now they're teaching facts and trying to get kids educated by just having them memorize a bunch of facts, but that's not really what science is all about.
And you see, if there is a problem with science teaching in America, then that would be the problem, that there is not enough critical thinking, and it's not just American schools, this is what's happening in British schools too, not enough criticism about things. So you could say the same about maybe Christian schools where creation is being taught, that maybe it's not being done correctly, that there's a lot of facts, and in that case, of course, it is genuine facts that are being taught, lots and lots of information, and that's great. But I've found sometimes speaking to them, they don't know how to use that information because they've not been taught the scientific process, and the information is not enough for science teaching.
Now, you got a story about that, don't you?
Well, that's right. Back in my 20s,
Okay.
you know, which I know is a long time ago, but back in my 20s when I first became a science teacher, I was just thinking about the first time. At that time, evolution was introduced in year 9 in British schools. Now, that would be the equivalent of, I think it's the equivalent of grade 8 here in the United States. High school would begin at the British year 7, so the year 9 would be about the third year of teaching. So they'd have a couple of years of introduction, and year 9 was the ages 13 to 14. And the first class that I'd taken all the way through, that I'd taught from year 7 all the way through, so they got to year 9, I'd gone through the whole process of making sure they knew about developing hypotheses, criticizing things, not taking things for granted, but knowing how to plan experiments and so on. And then it came to year 9, and of course in the curriculum I had to introduce evolution to them. So I introduced, you know, that there was this theory that some people had about how animals had developed, and the class fell about laughing. I didn't really need to do a great deal. Do people really believe that, sir? Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, how strange can it be? Where have they observed this? Which is a key question. Where have they observed these things happening? And of course, the point is they were not convinced by it. They knew the scientific processes to be able to criticize things. And that is the key to good science teaching and good science education, in my opinion.
This wasn't you talking about creation, trying to get them to believe this, and then showing evolution and them laughing. This is you just simply teaching what good science is and how to do it. And when they came across the concept, the hypothesis of evolution, they ridiculed it.
And
they could see right through it.
And the fact that they knew that they were allowed to do so, that they were not allowed to get out of hand and be disobedient, but they were allowed to criticize things scientifically. And you see, this article just does not get to the bottom of that. It talks about the fossil record, for example, and comes out with some amazing statements. So they're talking about transitional fossils. Where are they? And here's a couple of quotes. It says, the absence of fossil evidence supporting a transitional feature is not sufficient cause to reject the hypothesis that these species existed. In other words, they've got the answer in their mind before they even teach it. Whereas proper critical thinking, the pupils would say, well, hold on a minute, those transitional forms don't exist. Does that mean then that the story that we've got about how this developed is not correct? We need to look at it again and find different reasons.
They're literally doing science backwards.
Yeah.
They're saying, here's what we want to believe, and then they're going and looking for evidence for it. Rather than saying, this is a possibility, let's see if there's any evidence that supports this possibility.
One of the things that we creationists are criticized for is believing in the God of the gaps, that there's something we don't understand in science, therefore we say, well, God must have done it because that fits in the gaps. And of course, we don't believe that at all. God isn't the God of the gaps. He's our presupposition, because without believing in God, we can't understand anything. Of course,
literally, he's the God of everything.
That's
the
right.
things we know and that we don't know.
That's right. But, you know, again, and here's another quote from the same thing. Transitional features must have emerged somewhere in time between the species shown. In other words, what they believe in is not a God of the gaps. They believe in an evolution of the gaps.
Exactly.
If they don't understand it, it doesn't matter. Evolution must have happened because that's the only realistic way they have to understand it.
You know, that reminds me, we read a book or reviewed a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist by Randy Olson. In this book, basically what he's saying in Don't Be Such a Scientist is, look, there are pesky facts. There are details that go against what the overall point we're trying to make.
Yes.
Don't be such a scientist. Don't get hung up on those little things that go against what you're trying to say, which is the exact opposite of science.
Exactly.
You should just say, don't be a scientist, indoctrinate with whatever you want. One of the examples he gives is global warming. He says, sure, there are some facts that go against the idea of global warming, but don't focus on those. We want the overall picture of global warming to be pushed. So let's focus on what does push that.
Yeah, and that, of course, comes across in the teaching of evolution. And, you know, parents should be concerned not about the education of evolution, if it's taught properly and where they're able to criticize things, because they need to know there's a prevailing theory around, even though we know that prevailing theory is wrong. What parents should be worried about is not the education, but the indoctrination, where people are being told that something is definitely true when it is definitely not true. true. That is indoctrination. A good example, fitting in with what you were talking about there, is this whole business about peppered moths. We know we've got books like this one by your father, I Help I'm Being Taught Evolution, that talk about some of the things, some of the problems in textbooks, peppered moths being an example. And, without going into the whole story, we know the peppered moths story wouldn't have been anti-creationist anyway if it were true, but of course the whole principle was mistaken.
It's made up.
One of the things that I found out when I was researching this was that Michael Majerus, a professor at Cambridge University, did some more research into peppered moths in order to, in his mind, prove that the whole process was okay and did make some sort of sense. But he asked himself in his research, well, does it matter that some of the experimental techniques, here's the particular quote, he was asked that in view of all the errors, whether the peppered moth account should still be taught in schools, and he answered, the answer is an equivocal yes, because the basic story is easy to understand. My conclusion from that is that it seems as if to people like him, whether the example is easy to understand or not is far more important than whether it's actually true.
So we've got this great analogy. It drives home the point, even though it does not drive home an evolutionary point.
Yes.
But we were going to keep using it.
Yes.
And we know, like you said, the whole thing was made up.
Yes. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
That's right. That's right. Now, that book, by the way, Truth, Lies, and Science Education, you wrote that.
This is a book that I published in the United Kingdom, and it really talks about the English and the Welsh national curriculum system and the thinking behind education in the Western world, which you can get on Amazon because it doesn't really apply to the American education system directly.
But the point is, you go through a lot of facts that would apply to principles that would apply to us today as well.
That's right.
In American education. Wow. Well, guys, we want to thank you so much for joining us for the Creation Today show. We really want to provide information that gives you answers to help you defend your faith, know the God of the Bible, and defend Him. That really is the point. And so we want to thank you so much for that. We continue to get questions like this that say, hey, please help. What do we do about the teaching of evolution in school with our children and things like that? And so we hope this is a help to you when you do that.
That's right. Remember that you've always got the opportunity to make sure that your teachers are teaching your children correctly. Any questions you want to ask, address to questions@creationtoday.org, Twitter @creationtoday.
And Facebook.com/creationtoday and YouTube.com/creationtoday. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week.
Do you need the tools to defend your faith? Visit our websites for up-to-date content. Attend one of our live events. And shop online at creationstore.org. We are Creation Today.